when the fire goes out after awakening, the awakening paradox, when everything makes sense and yet nothing feels the same. Good morning, everyone. I'm Star Delta 9 and I am back with another video under Cracked Wide Open. I hope you're having a blessed day. Have you ever spent years doing the inner work? Maybe you journaled late at night when no one else was up and they were sleeping. Maybe you went away on a retreat. Or maybe you just started questioning yourself, questions that you never asked yourself before. Like, who am I? Why am I here? What am I really doing with my life? What actually matters to me? And you keep going deeper. And then you started peeling back the layers of that onion. The expectations, the conditioning, the roles, the relationships, the things you were taught you were supposed to want. And then one day something shifts. You have a moment of clarity that you can barely put words to. Everything suddenly seems connected and the noise in your head gets very quiet. You feel connected to something bigger than yourself and you think, this is it. This is where my real life begins, and you expect it to be fulfilled with fire, with passion, energy, and purpose, right? You think you're going to be unstoppable, but then something strange happens. The fire goes out, and nobody really prepared me for this part. You may look around at the career that you spent building for years, or the relationship you worked so hard to maintain, or the goals you were chasing, the milestones you were sprinting towards, and suddenly they don't feel like yours anymore. They feel like somebody else's dreams, and you may find yourself lying in bed thinking, why can't I make myself care? Why don't I want the things I used to want? What is wrong with me? And here's the part I really want you to hear. Nothing. You're not broken. You are not necessarily failing, and you are not automatically losing your mind because your old identity doesn't exist anymore. Sometimes when our understanding of ourselves changes, the things that once motivate us simply don't have the same power. And that can be incredibly disorienting. You know, the old version of you, for most of our lives, we built our identity. We learned what we were supposed to do. We learned what was success looked like. We learned what a good relationship is supposed to look like. We learned what we were supposed to accomplish, what we were supposed to earn, and how we were supposed to look, and who we were supposed to impress. And somewhere along the way, we can start confusing that identity with who we are actually. So maybe your career became your identity. Maybe you're the strong one and that became your identity. Maybe being a wife or a husband, a mother, father, a caregiver, a provider, achiever, or a rescuer became your identity. And there's nothing inherently wrong with any of those things. The problem comes when we believe this is all I am. Because when that identity begins to change, it can feel like we're losing ourselves when in reality, we may be discovering ourselves. So why awakening can feel so empty is this is the part that isn't talked about enough. People love talking about awakening as if it's a sudden becoming enlightened or joyful or peaceful and full of purpose. And maybe there are moments like that, but transformation isn't always comfortable. Sometimes clarity takes things away before it gives us something new. You may suddenly see patterns you couldn't see before. You may recognize that some of your ambitions were connected to simple fear, or maybe you were trying to prove you were good enough. Maybe you were chasing someone's approval, or maybe just trying to finally feel worthy. Maybe we were just terrified of being abandoned. Maybe you believe that if you could just accomplish enough, earn enough, love enough, give enough, sacrifice enough, and then finally you'd feel safe. And then something inside you says, I don't want this anymore. But here's the problem. You haven't figured out what you want instead. There is a space between the two identities, and that can feel like emptiness. The space between two identities, this is what people misunderstand. Sometimes you're just not lost. You're simply no longer willing to go back to who you were, but you haven't completely discovered who you're becoming yet. And that middle space can be incredibly uncomfortable because the old motivations don't work anymore, but the new motivations haven't fully developed. It's almost like standing in an empty room after you've moved all the furniture out. You look around and you say, what am I supposed to do now? And maybe the answer isn't do more. Maybe the answer is just listen. I know Robert Greene asked this question about ambition. He spent years examining ambitious humans, their nature, their identity, and how they mastered the ways people pursued success. And one of the ideas that resonated here is the difference between the image we construct for the world and the deeper person underneath that image. We can spend years pursuing things because we believe they will finally make us feel complete. The title, the money, the recognition, the relationship, the accomplishment, the approval. But what happens when you finally see that none of those things can tell you who you are? You begin to ask a much deeper question. If I don't need to prove myself anymore, what do I actually want? That's a completely different question. And sometimes it takes time to receive the answers. You don't have to force the fire back into your life. This is where I want to speak directly to a person watching who feels empty. Please don't immediately decide you have failed. You have not. You're not broken. Don't force yourself to become the old version of you again simply because that version was productive. Don't create another enormous list of things you need to accomplish so that you can feel valuable. And don't assume that because you aren't excited about your old dreams, that you have no purpose. Maybe you're just being invited to slow down long enough to discover what actually belongs to yourself. Ask yourself this: what would I do if nobody applauded? What would I choose if I didn't have to prove myself? What relationship feels nourishing instead of obligatory? What activities makes me lose track of time? And what am I naturally curious about? Maybe what matters to me when nobody's watching? Those questions can lead to something completely different. So please hear me when I say this part. This is also an important distinction. Feeling disconnected from old goals can happen during periods of profound personal change. But persistent emptiness or loss of pleasure, hopelessness, inability to function, or significant change in sleep or appetite or daily life can also be signs of some sort of depression or mental health concerns. Spiritual language should never be used to dismiss suffering. If you're struggling significantly, please talk with a qualified mental health professional or healthcare provider. You can explore your spiritual experiences and take care of your psychological well-being. Those things don't have to compete with each other. So what would come next? Well, eventually something begins to happen. It happens quietly. You start noticing what feels real, not what looks impressive, not what gets applause, but what makes other people feel comfortable, what feels real to you. And maybe your purpose doesn't arrive like lightning. Maybe it arrives as curiosity. Maybe it arrives as compassion or creativity. Maybe it arrives as teaching something that you learned the hard way. It arrives as helping someone else feel less alone. Maybe it arrives as finally just learning how to treat yourself the same way with the same amount of kindness that you spent your entire life giving to everyone else. And that kind of purpose is different because it isn't coming from, I need to prove myself. It's coming from, this matters to me. So if you're in a stage or a place right now where the old life doesn't fit, but the new life quite hasn't become clear, I want you to know something. You don't have to have all the answers today. You don't have to manufacture excitement. You don't have to force yourself to become passionate. And you don't have to apologize for changing. You're allowed to outgrow an identity. And you're allowed to question the life you built. You're allowed to sit in uncertainty, and you are allowed to discover yourself slowly. Maybe this isn't the end of your motivation. Maybe it's the end of motivation that was built on proving your worth. And perhaps what comes next is something much greater, deeper, more authentic. Not a life that looks good from the outside, but a life that finally feels like yours. So if this resonates with you, I'd love to hear you tell me something in the comments. Did your awakening make you feel more passionate about life? Or did it temporarily make you question everything? Because if you're experiencing this, I promise you, you're not alone. I'm right there with you. Until next video, thank you for watching. Have a blessed day. Namaste. Please subscribe, like, and comment, and share the video. Love y'all.